All right, Josh, you ready to dig in?
Let's go.
Okay, so the first one we have is from Mark. And Mark asks, is now a good time to consider a Roth conversion?
This is such a great question, Charlie. Let's take a step back and talk about what a Roth conversion is before we get into the specifics of how it fits into retirement and with what we're seeing in the market this year. So a Roth conversion is when you take money that's in a traditional IRA that is going to be taxable when it comes out and you convert it into a Roth IRA. And the benefit of doing that is when that money grows in the Roth IRA and comes out later, it's tax-free. But you have to pay ordinary income tax on the amount you convert in that tax year. So it's not a painless transaction, so you really want to be mindful about that. Now, one other note before we get further here, there used to be an undo button called a recharacterization, that if you started this process early in the year, you converted some to a Roth IRA, and then later in the year realized you were going to have a bigger tax bill than you thought, maybe higher income, you could undo that conversion through a process called a recharacterization. But in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that got eliminated. So that's not an option. So before you pursue doing a Roth conversion, you just want to know that that's a permanent decision. Make sure you know what the tax consequences are going to be and be prepared for that. So the really unique opportunity in retirement for somebody like Mark is if there are some years that Mark or somebody else is going to have lower income, lower taxable income, you may have the ability to prepay those taxes on the IRA distributions and get it into a Roth IRA where all that future growth is going to be tax-free. So I've actually got a client right now that is doing this. They retired a few years ago. They haven't started Social Security yet. Their pension hasn't started yet, so they've got virtually zero earned income for a few years. Mm-hmm. They know some point they're going to have to take money out of these traditional IRAs and pay taxes on them through those required minimum distributions. But they're going to be in a much higher tax bracket once Social Security and their pension starts. So they've been shifting some money every year. We're just kind of looking at their earned income or any taxable income, looking at the tax brackets and seeing how much can we be strategic and pay a lower tax rate now, shift it over to a Roth IRA, and it grows tax-free later. So that's the first thing to think about with retirement. If you've got lower income years, you can be strategic on taking advantage of some lower tax brackets.
Right, and we see that with folks who retire, quote, on the early side, because they have this period of time where they're not taking Social Security at that point. Maybe their pension hasn't kicked in, and they actually have maybe the lowest income they're going to have as a retiree right after they retire. It's kind of a gap that we often have to look to fill from a cash flow standpoint. So you're saying that's a good time to be considering this Roth conversion.
Exactly, especially if you've got some other assets that you can use to cover your cash flow, a brokerage account or some cash reserves, so you can really just use the IRA distributions to do these conversions. So the other really unique opportunity that we're seeing right now and may have prompted this question is the market's been down quite a bit the first part of this year. And that typically is viewed as a negative thing by people, but this is one circumstance where it can have some upside potential. So when you convert from traditional IRA to Roth IRA, what you're actually converting is shares, either shares of a company that you own or shares of a mutual fund. So right now, those shares are worth less than they were on January 1st, most likely. So when you think about you can convert those at a lower value, pay a lower tax, get them into a Roth IRA, and hopefully when that value rebounds, that gain, that growth takes place in a tax-free environment.
So this would be a time that really would just be opportunistic if you think about it.
Exactly. So if it's something that you're thinking might make sense for you and your portfolio happens to be down, it's a way that you could move either more shares for the same tax dollars, or for less tax dollars, or move more over and pay the same taxes. So it's just an opportunity to be strategic when a lot of other people might be more concerned if you're in that low tax bracket and you've got some Roth potential, this is a good time to take advantage of it.
What would be some of the risks in doing something like this?
A couple of risks are if you have some earned income that you're not accounting for, might be a surprise later in the year if you've got any, real estate or private equity that you weren't expecting a distribution from, but fourth quarter that happens. If you
normally you're okay having unexpected income hit you, right?
Exactly. Capital gains can affect your tax bracket as well. So you might not expect a lot of capital gains. We're only halfway through the year, so just want to be mindful of that. I would definitely recommend talk with your CPA, your tax professional about this to really understand what is the projected tax liability and have funding for that. Where am I going to pay for that? You don't want to take an IRA distribution on top of this conversion, most likely, to pay that tax. So make sure you've got that tax squared away elsewhere.
Got it. All right. Well, just to kind of recap that, it sounds like timing could be opportunistic with the markets being down, so better than it was maybe in January. Making sure you have capital assets to pay the tax the next April. That's something that a lot of times we forget about. We have a tax bill to pay. So making sure you have funds there. You're not having to get those actually from the same IRA. And is that actually something that will make sense for your strategy? Is there sort of a tax arbitrage? So those are kind of the considerations to think for. So that's good. All right, well,